"Figure it out yourself, Linda," my husband barked, his voice dripping with cruelty as he slammed the car door. His two sisters burst into hysterical laughter, their manicured hands clapping against each other like they'd just witnessed the punchline of the century. Before I could even process what was happening, the engine roared, and the car shot forward, spraying dust and gravel across my shoes. I stumbled back, coughing, shielding my face with my hands. Then it hit me. They had left me. 200 miles from home. At a gas station in the middle of nowhere. With no wallet, no phone charger, no way back. I stood frozen, clutching my tote bag like it was a lifeline, my ears ringing with the sound of their fading laughter. "Are you okay, ma'am?" a man at the pump asked, staring at me with wide eyes. I forced a tight smile, though humiliation burned hotter than the summer sun above us. "I'm fine, just fine." But I wasn't fine, not even close. The truth was, this wasn't the first time my husband and his sisters had made me the butt of their cruel games. I remembered one Christmas when they forgot to buy me a gift, only to snicker when I unwrapped an empty box filled with tissue paper. I remembered the time his sister Clara, accidentally, spilled wine all over my dress at a family party, then smirked and said, "Red is more your color anyway." And my husband? He always brushed it off. "Relax, Linda. They're just joking." But this wasn't a joke. This was abandonment. This was cruelty in its rawest form. "Lady, they really left you?" the gas station clerk muttered from behind the counter as I stumbled inside, still trembling. "Yes," I whispered. My throat felt dry, my voice like sandpaper. He shook his head. "That's messed up. You got someone you can call?" My fingers itched toward my phone. I pulled it out. 3% battery left. One cracked bar of service. I could dial, but what then? Call him? Call them? Beg for them to come back? No. I'd sooner crawl home barefoot across glass. I shoved the phone back in my bag. "No," I said firmly. "No one to call." The hours dragged. I sat on the curb outside, watching cars pull in and out of the gas station, strangers glancing at me and quickly looking away. To them, I was invisible. To my husband and his sisters, I was disposable. As the sun dipped low, the ache in my stomach grew. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. My feet throbbed from standing, pacing, waiting. My pride screamed louder than my hunger. I will not go crawling back. But inside, rage coiled like a serpent. Their laughter still echoed in my skull. The way his sisters leaned into each other, clutching their sides, tears streaming down their cheeks at the sight of me stranded. The way my husband looked at me, not with love, not with care, but with satisfaction. Like leaving me there had been his plan all along. "They think this is funny," I whispered to myself. "They think this is just another prank." But something inside me cracked that night. I wasn't just humiliated. I was liberated. Because if they thought this little game would break me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I stood up, brushed the dust off my clothes, and looked out into the dark highway stretching ahead of me. "They don't know it yet," I murmured, "but they've just set me free." And that was the night my revenge was born. But you tell me, what would you have done if your own husband and his sisters abandoned you like trash 200 miles from home? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of my shocking revenge stories. The neon sign of the gas station flickered against the night sky, casting an eerie glow across the cracked pavement. I wrapped my arms around myself, the cool wind biting through my thin blouse. I replayed the scene again and again, the screech of tires, the echo of their laughter, the smug look on my husband's face as if he'd finally proven his point, that I was nothing without him. But he had no idea what I was about to become. "Ma'am, we're closing soon," the clerk said, stepping outside, jingling a set of keys. "You can't stay here all night." I forced a shaky breath. "Is there a motel nearby?" He shrugged. "There's one about 10 miles down." "But, you walking?" I nodded stiffly. He gave me a look of pity. "Careful out there. This ain't exactly a safe stretch of highway." So I walked. The night swallowed me, the silence broken only by the distant hum of crickets and the occasional roar of a semi-truck blowing past me, its headlights searing my eyes. My legs ached, my shoes rubbed blisters raw, but each step pounded a new vow into my chest. Never again will they laugh at me. Never again will they leave me powerless. By dawn, my hair was plastered with sweat, my throat parched, my feet swollen. But I had made it. A peeling sign that read "Rest in Motel" loomed like salvation. I staggered inside, dropped a handful of crumpled bills I'd hidden deep in my bag on the counter, and croaked, "One night, please." The woman at the desk barely glanced up. "Room 6, end of the hall." I collapsed onto the lumpy mattress, staring at the stained ceiling. Sleep should have come, but rage kept my eyes wide open. Their words echoed. "Figure it out yourself, Linda." The memory burned so hot I sat upright. I couldn't just lie here. I couldn't just survive. I had to fight back. The next day, I found the bus station. A wrinkled schedule told me the next ride headed vaguely in the direction of home was in 4 hours. So I waited. And that's when my phone buzzed. The cracked screen lit up. 12 missed calls, then 19, then 25, all from him. I stared at the glowing number, my pulse thundering. Part of me wanted to answer, to scream, to let him hear the venom dripping from my voice, but instead, I slipped the phone back into my bag. Let him stew. By the time the bus rattled into the station, my missed calls had climbed to 37. The ride was long, each bump jostling the anger tighter into my bones. When I finally stepped off, dusty and exhausted, the counter ticked higher. 53, 67, 74. By the time I reached the city limits, it read 89 missed calls, 89 desperate attempts, 89 signs of panic, and not a single one I would ever answer. When I finally stood in front of my house, the curtains twitched. My husband burst through the door, wild-eyed, hair disheveled, his sisters huddled behind him. "Linda, where the hell have you been?" he shouted, grabbing my arm. His grip was tight, almost frantic. I yanked free, my voice like ice. "Where have I been? Where you left me, remember?" His sisters shifted uncomfortably, their painted smiles gone. "It was a joke," Clara mumbled, eyes darting to the floor. "A joke?" I snapped, my voice rising until neighbors peeked through their blinds. "Leaving your brother's wife 200 miles from home with no way back? That's what you call funny?" Silence. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across their faces. Good. That night, I didn't speak to him, not a word. I shut myself in the guest room and stared at the ceiling. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would forgive like always. But he didn't realize I was already making plans. Plans that would not just humiliate him, plans that would destroy everything he thought he controlled. I didn't return home that night. Not the next night either. Instead, I stayed in a cheap motel with peeling wallpaper, the kind of place where no one asks questions. My phone lit up the next morning. 89 missed calls. My husband, his sisters, even his mother. The messages were frantic. "Linda, it was just a joke. Where are you? Please come back home. We didn't think you'd take it this far. Don't embarrass the family." Embarrass the family? I stared at the words, my lips curling into a bitter smile. They had left me in the middle of nowhere like trash on the side of the road, and now they worried about their embarrassment? That was the moment my grief hardened into steel. I knew one thing. If I walked back into that house, they'd laugh it off, pat themselves on the back, and go right back to treating me like a disposable accessory. No, I wasn't going back empty-handed. They wanted to see how far I could take it. They were about to find out. I went to a diner across from the motel. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, poured me coffee. "Rough night?" she asked, noticing my wrinkled dress and swollen eyes. "You could say that," I whispered, staring into the dark liquid like it held answers. She leaned closer. "Sometimes, honey, the best revenge is just living well." But I didn't want just to live well. I wanted them to feel the sting of humiliation, the way I had felt standing in that deserted parking lot with nothing but the echo of their laughter in my ears. By noon, I had a plan brewing. I went to the bank first. Over the years, my husband and I had a joint account, but I also had a private savings stash, money from my late father's inheritance that no one knew about. That was my lifeline. That was also going to be my weapon. I called an old friend, Marcy, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She was the kind of woman who knew how to dig into people's lives, legally or otherwise. "Linda? Wow, it's been ages. What's going on?" "I need information," I said, my voice low but sharp. "On my husband, on his sisters, bank accounts, loans, investments, every little thing you can find, and I'm willing to pay." There was a pause on the line, then a soft chuckle. "Sounds like trouble, the juicy kind. I'll get back to you." That night, as I lay on the stiff motel bed, I thought about every slight, every insult. The way my husband would dismiss my opinions at family gatherings. The way his sisters always introduced me as his wife, but never by my name. And now, this prank. They had underestimated me. My plan was no longer about surviving their cruelty. It was about dismantling their pride, piece by piece, until the very foundation of their smug little world cracked beneath their feet. I closed my eyes with one final thought echoing in my head. You abandoned me 200 miles from home. But soon, you'll be the ones lost with no way back. 2 mornings after I called Marcy, a thin envelope slid under my motel door. No return address, no note, just a USB thumb drive and a single line of handwriting on a torn receipt. Start with the house. My fingers trembled as I plugged the drive into the motel's cracked laptop. Marcy had delivered faster than I expected. A folder opened. Bank ledgers, property deeds, scanned email threads, social media screenshots, and a spreadsheet. Page after page, she had dug into my husband's life the way a relentless root finds weak mortar in a wall. I sat back and read until the sun made the motel room glow. The first thing I learned made my stomach drop. 1. The mortgage on our house had been quietly refinanced, not to our benefit. A short-term loan taken out under his name to cover urgent business cash flow, with a private investor who'd recently made noises about taking possession if payments were missed. 2. My husband had co-signed a line of credit for Clara 2 months before the prank. Clara had charged luxuries she couldn't afford, designer bags, dinners, investment opportunities that went nowhere. The bank statements showed transfers to a shell company with a familiar realtor's name attached. 3. There were rumors, and some documentation, about a discreet loan he'd given to a man in town with a shady past. A man who'd recently been slapped with liens and who'd been seen providing muscle at a few of their less reputable get-togethers. 4. The sisters had been angling to sell our family's lake property for years, pocketing the proceeds into home improvement accounts. The ledger indicated inflated invoices and a bunch of consulting fees paid to a company owned by one of Clara's close friends. None of it was definitive proof of anything criminal. But proof wasn't what I needed yet. I needed leverage. I needed vulnerabilities that could be turned into pressure. Public pressure, social pressure, legal pressure. I wanted them to feel exposed in the way that had hollowed me out the night they drove away. That evening I called Marcy, and we met at a coffee shop 2 towns over. She was all business, eyes sharp beneath her scarf. "You found all this?" I asked, sliding the laptop across the table. She nodded. "And more. I tapped into probate records. Your mother-in-law's will had a clause someone tried to bury. The clause named Clara as a beneficiary if certain conditions were met. But the paperwork around those conditions was messy. Your husband kept files close. If someone were to look, really look, the holes would start to show." "How close?" I asked. "Close enough that a lawyer will listen if you go in the right direction," she said. "But you don't file yet, not without a plan." Good. I didn't want to rush to court. I wanted theater. I wanted to pull on a string and watch the whole tapestry unravel in front of friends, neighbors, the bank, and the people who loved to gossip. Over the next 2 weeks, I built my quiet network. I met with a retired real estate attorney, a woman named June, who owed me a favor from a charity I'd supported years ago. June reviewed the deeds and said in clipped, careful sentences, "There's sloppy bookkeeping, misfiled transfers, and one suspicious signature that doesn't match your husband's. If you want their attention without the courthouse, let the bank see what's missing." She offered to draft a letter, anonymous, formal, delivered by certified mail, requesting an audit of the refinance. Marcy, bless her, started a whisper campaign. Not the mean kind, the factual kind. A dry email from a concerned neighbor to the homeowners association about odd invoices and a developer's interest in the lake property. Photographs of the fancy vacations Clara had been posting, all charged to lines of credit she didn't actually have. A tip, anonymous and perfectly timed, to an investigative reporter at the local paper about suspicious property transactions connected to the realtor tied to Clara's shell company. It felt dirty. It felt righteous. Meanwhile, I shaped my personal life with deliberate purpose. I stopped waiting to be rescued. I took a barista shift at a bookstore cafe. I took temp accounting work 2 nights a week. I learned to read foreclosure notices and notice periods, how escrow worked, what lien holders were required to file, and when. Knowledge, I realized, was a weapon in itself. One evening, Clara reappeared in my life like a ghost, not physically, only online. A picture, her smiling on a yacht, the necklace I'd given her glittering at her throat. The caption read, "Living my best life." I closed the laptop and a surge of cold fury ran through me. Good. Let her wear the trophy. The more she displayed it, the more visible her greed became. The first domino fell not in a courtroom, but in a neighborhood meeting at the country club. The homeowners association received the anonymous notice. They called a special meeting to discuss financial irregularities tied to recent property listings. Clara and my husband came in smug, expecting a few bored neighbors, a muted conversation, maybe a reshuffling of picnic times. They did not expect June, in a smart navy suit, folder in hand, to stand up and say clearly and loudly, "We have reason to believe several transactions associated with the Johnson property have discrepancies that merit immediate auditing." Heads turned, phones came out, rumors sparked like tinder. Clara's face drained, my husband's jaw worked. They tried to laugh it off. "Administrative error," he barked. "We'll correct it. Nothing to see here." But June had already walked around the room and left copies of the certified letter on chairs in the front row. She had planned it to look accidental. The realtor who did business with Clara sat very still. Someone whispered the word forged. The gossip engine roared. The next day, anonymous emails with scanned bank statements landed at the local paper. The reporter called. He wanted to know if I'd corroborate the claims. I didn't speak ill of my husband at first, not publicly. I simply said, "There are public records anyone can check." The reporter dug. The more he wrote, the more the bank watchers started poking. 2 weeks in, the investor who'd financed the refinance sent a terse email to my husband. We need to discuss the payments. There are discrepancies. Are you sure your valuations were correct? My husband, who used to brush off my worries with a sip and a sneer, now shuffled papers and made phone calls at all hours. His sisters whispered in corners, their faces pale. The bank placed a temporary hold while auditors reviewed the refinance file. A small, legal hold. But it was a chokehold on their breath. And while their money dried up, my life expanded. I rented a tiny apartment over a florist, learned to balance a ledger, grew vegetable herbs in a mason jar on the windowsill. I knew the practical steps to take next because I'd been learning them quietly. If the refinance failed, the investor had the right to call the loan. If their invoices were proven fraudulent, the realtor's license could be reviewed. If Clara's line of credit was shown to be misrepresented, the creditors would demand payment. I wasn't a lawyer. I was, however, an architect of consequence. Each small, lawful move I made, a letter here, a photo there, a quiet call to the right person, dug at the ground under them until the terrain shifted. One night, I watched them from across the cafe as I worked the late shift. They stumbled in together, anxious, glancing at the newspapers spread out on the counter. The family's union had always been performative. Now it was fracturing. Clara hissed at my husband. He, in turn, glared at the realtor on his phone. They had never imagined I had the will, the resources, or the cunning to turn their prank into a slow-burning reckoning. They were learning the truth of what I had always suspected. Their power depended on everyone else believing they had it. I refilled a coffee, and when Clara's hand brushed the counter as she stormed past, I felt no desire for confrontation. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It could be the patient unspooling of all they had built on shaky accounts and borrowed trust. As they left, I wiped the counter, humming to myself. The next day, an auditor would call. The week after, a lien might be slapped. The timing, the theater, all of it was unfolding exactly the way I wanted. They had abandoned me 200 miles away, thinking it a joke. They had no idea their laugh would be the sound that started the collapse. They thought the worst had been a single bad headline. They didn't expect the press to keep digging. By the time the auditors finished their preliminary review, the bank had frozen a chunk of the refinance funds pending a full forensic audit. The local paper ran another piece, this one longer, with documents attached and quotes from people who'd once laughed at my husband at dinner parties. The headline was merciless. Family ties under scrutiny. Questionable transfers, missing receipts. At the country club, dinner chatter dried up the night someone waved that paper and asked in a voice loud enough for all to hear, "Isn't that the Johnson family?" The table grew very still. Faces that had once smiled indulgently at my husband's jokes now tilted toward him with curiosity and thinly veiled suspicion. The laugh lines around their eyes hardened. They weren't laughing anymore. Clara's Instagram flooded with venom. The yacht photo came back up with comments that were no longer admiring, snippets of the article copied in furious text. "Show us the receipts," someone wrote. "Who's funding you?" The comments multiplied, ugly and blunt. One local influencer, someone who had once asked Clara for styling tips, wrote, "If this is true, I won't be promoting her brand anymore." Within 48 hours, Clara's partnerships fizzled. The invitations to charity galas dried up. The little world she had bought with credit cards began to crack. Inside the house, the cracks spread even faster. "Calm down," my husband told Clara one afternoon as they stood in the kitchen, papers spread like a funeral blanket between them. His voice trembled despite his attempt at control. "We can fix this. We'll hold a fundraiser, rebrand the lake property as community benefit, get donations. The realtor will smooth it over," Clara snapped. "You mean you'll lie to them again, because that's worked so well." Her fingers raked through her hair, the mascara under her eyes smudged. "You used my name on those transfers. I trusted you." "Because you asked me to help," he shot back. "You begged me to co-sign. I did it to protect you." "Protect me?" She laughed, but it sounded like a sob. You put my name on paperwork so you could steal from the estate. I thought you were my brother. Their mother hovered in the doorway like a ghost trying to intervene, but even her calm had a brittle edge. Enough, she said weakly. We will get a lawyer. We, Clara scoffed. You've always sided with him. The room descended into petty accusations. Who bought what? Who had known which invoice was inflated? Who had paid off the landscaper with a check that bounced? The sisters began finger-pointing in a way they never had when they were united in ridicule of others. Their alliance, the one that had sharpened their cruelty for years, collapsed into infighting as each tried to throw the blame onto the other. My role in all of this was surgical and silent. I didn't stride into their fights and scream my triumph. Instead, I watched the fallout from the outskirts, from the cafe counter at night, from the anonymous tip threads Marcy kept feeding the press, from June's careful legal nudges. Each small shove created another wobble. Each wobble took the shape of a public humiliation I didn't have to shout. Lenders calling with terse notices, the realtor getting a letter threatening license review, a charity pulling its sponsorship because a board member feared association with scandal. Their social calendar collapsed first. Friends I'd once pretended to like stopped returning calls. Invitations to private bridge nights, to gallery openings, to Sunday church lunches vanished. Pride and money had been their currency, and both evaporated. Then came the creditor notices. One crisp morning, a courier delivered a stack of envelopes to their door. He handed Clara an itemized invoice for unpaid interest. He handed my husband a letter from the investor. Default notice. Immediate repayment demanded. For the first time in years, the house's walls had echoes that weren't brimming with safe laughter. They echoed with the rattling of coins no longer in pocket. The brothers-in-law who used to shrug and say, "He'll sort it out," were suddenly checking balance sheets and calling accountants. Neighbors who once waved and offered bright greetings now angled their conversations where the Johnsons could hear, voices low and sharp. Rumors mutate quickly in small towns. Mine had been guided into the right ears. One evening, a group of men who'd once played golf with my husband came by, just to talk. They sat at his kitchen table and said things he never expected to hear. "We invested because we believed in your leadership, Dan. But if the books don't check out, we want our money back." They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their disappointment was worse. Panic begot mistakes. My husband started making calls he had no business making. Threats softened into pleading, threats disguised as promises. He sold the family boat in a frantic Sunday sale for a fraction of its worth. He pulled Clara's access to certain cards, claiming fraud, which only made her more furious and more public about her betrayal. She lashed out in interviews, making statements that were quoted verbatim in the paper. He used me. He used my trust, and now he blames me. That quote became a rallying cry for the reporters. My husband was bleeding credibility, and with each new article, the community's patience shrank. The most delicious part of a slow burn like this is watching the abusers try to perform normalcy. They hosted a small friends and family barbecue the month after the initial articles, thinking that fresh laughter and grilled chicken could tamp down the embers. But the night was stiff with awkward conversations and clipped smiles. Someone produced a printout with the most damning bank transfers circled, casually placed on the buffet table as if by accident. A few neighbors passed around their phones and whispered, "We heard the bank is auditing their accounts." Tension rose like steam. At that barbecue, their sisterly unity collapsed into open warfare. Clara accused my husband in front of everyone. "You did this. You signed my name and moved the money." He fired back, "I did it because you begged me to. You'd have lost everything without me." Words snapped like brittle branches. People watched, mouths open. The spectacle was its own verdict. The final blow didn't require my hand. It required only that their choices had left them exposed. One of the investors, a prominent man who'd championed my husband's business ventures at every meeting, called the bank and asked for an immediate review of all related transactions. The bank obliged. Within days, the bank issued a public notice of irregularities. The headlines made them the center of a scandal no dinner could cover. My husband came to the cafe one evening, eyes rimmed in red, voice gone small. "Linda," he began, like a man trying to remember how to breathe. "We never meant—" I didn't answer. I poured a latte, slid it across the counter, watched steam rise between us. His shoulders trembled. He reached for my hand. "Please. We can fix this. I'll get help. You left me 200 miles from home," I said quietly, finally. "You laughed while I stood in the dust. You wanted to see me suffer. Now you know how it feels when everything is taken." He swallowed. "I'm sorry. I am. Please. Come back." His voice was small and thin, a child's plea. Behind him, I could see the hospital corners of his life showing, the suits unpressed, the unpaid bills on the table he'd been ignoring. And what I saw, in that fit of raw exposure, was that they had no plan for humility. They had no strategy for apology. Their arrogance had conditioned them only to expect applause. When he begged, his eyes hollow and desperate, it felt like the universe handing me something I had not asked for, a clear and present apology that couldn't erase what he'd done. But even as he pleaded, the threads I had loosened continued to unravel on their own. A lender placed a lien on the lake house. Clara's sponsor sent a terse message. "We are temporarily suspending collaborations pending further notice." The realtor's license came under review. The township called for records of the supposed community improvements. The humiliation multiplied in small, standardized ways. Missed invitations, curt emails, closed bank doors. The sisters began to call each other names in private, then in public. Friends turned into witnesses. And every phone call they placed, every frantic attempt to patch a life built on easy cruelty, ended with a polite decline or a terse legal clerk on the other end asking for documentation that simply did not exist. I had not needed to shout or smash. I hadn't even needed to reveal my own hand beyond a few well-placed notes and a quiet hire of people who knew where to press. The law and the community had done the rest. Their world, once so delicately performed, had been exposed as a flimsy stage. When my husband finally fell to his knees in front of me and asked for mercy, it was only one more scene in the slow, inevitable fall. He had been the architect of his own ruin. I had only shown the door and let the tide that he'd created sweep him out. The winter air outside bit cold against my cheeks as I left him kneeling in the cafe. Snow crunched under my boots, each step measured, each breath steady. Inside, the lights glowed warm. Behind me, his shadow hunched over the counter like a man stripped of skin. But I didn't turn back. I'd learned long ago. Pity was the trap they used to drag you back into chains. The scandal did not slow down. If anything, it gathered momentum. The local paper turned into a drumbeat. Every few days another piece appeared, each one revealing something uglier. Falsified invoices, transfers disguised as consulting fees, and an anonymous source confirming that investor funds were spent on personal luxuries. The sisters, once queens of laughter at other people's expense, now quarreled so openly that neighbors whispered about the fights spilling into the street. Clara slammed doors, shouted curses, threw dishes. At night, their mother cried so loudly the neighbors heard through the walls. They had mocked me once for being fragile. Now, fragility dripped from every window of their home. But the true breaking point came not from papers or creditors, but from silence. The invitations stopped. The phone no longer rang. Their inboxes, once bursting with gala invites, sat empty. Their social media, once flooded with likes, withered. Clara posted a picture of her morning coffee, once a reliable source of 3,000 hearts. It received fewer than 50. Half of those were sarcastic emojis. People are jealous, she muttered, scrolling through comments. But the way her hand shook betrayed the lie. Her brother, my husband, paced the kitchen like a caged animal, calling anyone who'd still pick up. "It's temporary," he said over and over, though no one asked. "We'll come out stronger." Each call ended the same, with a clipped excuse or a dial tone. One night, he returned from a meeting with one of the investors, his face pale, his tie loose. "They want their money," he whispered to Clara. "All of it, within 90 days. "That's impossible," she snapped. "We don't have it. They don't care. If we can't pay—" He trailed off, staring at the floor. It could turn criminal. The word hung in the air like a curse. Suddenly, the house that had once been a stage for mockery turned into a prison. They closed blinds. They avoided eye contact at grocery stores. Neighbors stopped waving. Parents whispered at school pickups, and kids who used to play with their children no longer came around. Inside, accusations sharpened into knives. "You said we'd be safe if we moved the money," Clara screamed. "You begged me to do it," he shouted back. "You ruined me." "You ruined yourself." Plates shattered. Doors slammed. Every night was war. And then came the moment that marked the true collapse. One morning, police cars pulled into their driveway. Officers in crisp uniforms stepped out, their radios crackling. Neighbors watched from windows as the family was questioned, their front door left ajar. The officers weren't there to arrest, not yet. But the message was clear. The investigation had crossed from rumor into official action. That afternoon, as snow began to fall again, my husband appeared outside the cafe once more. His face was thinner now, his pride gone. He stood there for a long time before coming in. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. "Linda, they're tearing us apart. Clara won't speak to me. The investors, the police. I can't." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as tears pricked his eyes. "I can't survive this without you." I stirred the milk frother, the hiss filling the silence between us. "You abandoned me in the middle of nowhere," I said softly. 200 miles from home. 89 missed calls. You wanted me to feel like nothing. You left me for dead in my own marriage." He winced, like the memory was a knife. "I thought it was a joke," he whispered. "We didn't mean—" "You meant every laugh," I interrupted. "Every sneer, every word you spoke when you told your sisters I was just a burden. You enjoyed it. And now, you want me to save you." He collapsed into the chair across from me, his hands trembling. "Please, just, please." The hiss of the frother faded. Silence settled again, heavy and absolute. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered that dusty road, the heat beating down, the sound of their laughter fading as the car disappeared. I remembered how my chest burned with humiliation as I dialed his number over and over, 89 times, and I let the silence stay. Because sometimes the cruelest revenge is not shouting, not fighting, not even gloating. It is walking away while they drown in the mess they built themselves. That night, word spread quickly. Clara had left the house. She'd packed a bag, slammed the door, and driven away. Their alliance was broken for good. Neighbors said they saw her crying at a gas station alone, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. And him? He stayed behind. A man who once strutted, who once mocked me with his sisters, now sat in an empty house, curtains drawn, creditors pounding at the door, his laughter gone. The Johnson family, once the self-proclaimed royalty of their neighborhood, had turned into a cautionary tale. And I had my cafe, my peace, my dignity. They had taken none of it with them. Weeks turned into months, and the Johnson family saga unraveled like a bad soap opera no one wanted to watch but everyone whispered about. Their once pristine home, with its manicured lawn and polished cars, became a shell of itself. Paint peeled from the shutters. The luxury SUV sat in the driveway, repossession notices tucked under its wiper. Neighbors who once envied them now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Children whispered in classrooms about the family with the cops outside their house. Invitations, those precious lifelines that kept Clara and her brother afloat in society, dried up completely. No dinner parties, no charity galas, no appearances in glossy magazines. And I flourished. My cafe, once a small corner project, bloomed into something more. People poured in not just for the coffee, but for the peace it carried. My regulars became friends, and I poured my energy into building something real, something no one could strip from me. It wasn't just business, it was dignity, brick by brick, cup by cup. One cold spring morning, a neighbor slipped into my cafe, her scarf pulled tight, her eyes darting as if carrying a scandal too hot to hold. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're saying Clara disappeared again," she murmured. "Vanished in the night, packed bags, left her kids with their mother. No one's seen her since." I blinked, stirring sugar into my tea. "Is that so?" She nodded eagerly. "And your husband? Well, they say the investors are moving to seize the house. He's drowning." I set down my spoon, the clink ringing sharp in the quiet. "How poetic," I said softly. It wasn't joy I felt, not satisfaction, something colder, like watching the final move in a game I'd stopped playing months ago. Days later, the proof came. Foreclosure notices plastered across the Johnson home. Strangers in dark suits arrived to take inventory of what remained. The once proud matriarch of the family sat on her porch in a thin sweater, weeping as reporters snapped photos. And him, my husband. I saw him one last time. He came to the cafe again, shoulders slumped, suit wrinkled, eyes hollow. He looked less like the man who had once abandoned me on a lonely road, and more like a boy lost in his own nightmare. He stood at the counter, lips trembling, before finally asking, "Why, Linda? Why did you let it all happen?" I leaned across, my voice steady. "Because you taught me how to survive humiliation. And now you're learning the lesson yourself." For a moment, he looked as though he might collapse right there. Then he turned, dragging himself toward the door, a man swallowed whole by the consequences of his own cruelty. I didn't follow, because revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's letting the weight of their choices crush them while you sip your tea in peace. The final chapter of their downfall played out publicly. Headlines declared bankruptcy, fraud investigations, family breakdowns. His name, once tied to wealth and laughter, became synonymous with betrayal and shame. Clara never returned. Some whispered she ran abroad. Others said she'd taken up with a man who had no idea the shadow following her name. But I stayed. Not hidden, not broken, not begging for a place at their table. I built my own table, and people came to sit with me. My cafe became a home not just for me, but for anyone who had ever been mocked, silenced, humiliated, and had found the strength to rise. And when I closed the shop each night, I sometimes thought back to that dusty road where it all began. The laughter fading, the car disappearing, my phone lighting up with unanswered calls. 89 times. Now, when my phone buzzed, it wasn't with desperation. It was with love, community, friendship, with reminders that I had chosen the harder path, and it had led me here. I never went back, and I never will, because some betrayals deserve no forgiveness, only distance. And that, dear viewers, was the story of how my husband and his sisters pranked me by abandoning me 200 miles from home, and how their laughter turned into their ruin. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have walked away the same way I did? or taken a different kind of revenge? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story shook you, and subscribe so you never miss another one of my shocking tales. And stay tuned, because in my next story, I'll reveal what happened when I discovered that my own son set a box at my doorstep, and the truth inside nearly destroyed me.